Okay, well, we're here today with Jake Burns, a singer of Stiff Little Fingers. Jake, could you tell me when you first became interested enough into wanting to form a band and how the beginnings of Stiff Little Fingers started?
I mean, it depends whether you want to know when I first became interested in wanting to be in a band and wanting to play the guitar and stuff. That goes way back to, I think, about 1970, when I would have been like 12 years old. And BBC Northern Ireland had recorded the farewell concert by a band called Taste. Right. Who were like a sort of the trend at the time was like for power trios along the likes of Cream and people like that. And Taste were basically Rory Gallagher's breakthrough band. And I remember sitting at 12-year-old watching them and basically looking at him and going, "That's what I want to do. That's what I want," you know. So that was when I basically wanted to learn to play the guitar, and I think I got a guitar a couple of years later. Took a lot of badgering off my parents to get one, because obviously they were convinced that it was going to be, you know, sort of keep the neighbours awake all bloody night, and it cost a fortune in electricity and what have you. And when I did get it, I didn't realise how difficult it was to play the damn thing. So I think I had it for about a year and a half before I learned how to tune it, you know. Right. And I remember actually sort of looking, because if you remember, this was the days of sort of really crap Saturday night telly, and I remember looking at it and thinking, well, fuck me, if Val Doonican can do this, I can fucking do it. So I actually stuck at it. So it's thanks to Val Doonican and Rory Gallagher that I'm still here.
Still doing it.
Yeah, I mean, the Stiff Little Fingers thing, though, came about. I was playing in sort of basically school bands. And the one I was in at the time was a band called Highway Star, who had played. We had managed to go out and play like a couple of pubs and clubs and community centres and things, but we really weren't very good. Basically because we weren't very good musicians. We were very limited. We just never quite sounded enough like Lynyrd Skynyrd to get away with it, you know.
Right.
And then, God bless them, The Damned came along, and Henry, who was our rhythm guitarist, got heavily into the whole punk thing right from the off.
Yeah.
To be fair, I mean, Henry's grounding was at that stage more into like the likes of T-Rex and stuff like that. I was always the sort of the guy that was more into sort of the Black Sabbaths of this world. Although even by that stage I'd gotten fed up with heavy metal. It just bored me by that time. The people I was buying records by then were mainly sort of Graham Parker and the Rumour, Dr. Feelgood, basically pub rock bands, if you like.
Yeah.
So we were both in our own divergent ways veering away from the sort of the heavy metal hero. And when Henry bought, I think he bought sort of the first couple of Damn singles and album and the Sex Pistols records, and he kept bringing them across to my place. And we were both like, this is great, this is exactly what we should be doing. Yeah. The other guys in the band weren't so convinced. But I mean, the big watershed was the first Clash album. That was go out, cut your hair, stop mucking about time, you know. Up to that point, we had still been singing songs about bowling down Californian highways and what have you. And I mean, it meant nothing to me. I'd never been further west than Galway in my life, you know. And to suddenly hear the Clash, I mean, because although the Damned and the Pistols and stuff that we'd had prior to this was great, it was really exciting, and but it was only exciting musically. I mean, lyrically, it didn't. To be honest, I couldn't really make out a lot of what they were saying. Quite how I made out Joe, I'll never know, but I did. And to realise that they were actually singing about their own lives and sort of growing up in West London was suddenly, it was like a bolt out of the blue, you know. And the combination of that and subsequently meeting Gordon Ogilvie, who became our first manager, really galvanised the whole thing. But before we'd met Gordon, that we had become Stiff Little Fingers and we had started playing basically we were like almost, I think somebody once memorably described us as a K-tail punk band, because we basically, we didn't have any material of our own at the time, so we just did what bands in Northern Ireland did, which was like you became like a human jukebox. Yeah. So we would go on an early Stiff Little Fingers gig would consist of the entire first Damned album, as many Sex Pistols singles as we could get our hands on at the time. I think we did we do anything by the New York Dolls? No, I don't think so. We did something by Iggy and the Stooges, but fuck me if I can remember what it was. That was Ali's influence. Ali, by the way, got into the band because the only person we knew who actually had a Marshall amp. We had all these crap imitation things. And so, yeah, that was kind of how it started.
That's how it started. The personnel originally of Highway Star that became Stiff Little Fingers, of course, was Henry, Ali and Brian Falloon.
That's right, and a bass player called Gordon Blair, who went on to join Rudy.
Right, right. When the transition to Stiff Little Fingers took place, obviously you were in a fairly good position initially. because of the fact that not a lot of those original punk bands even dared to set foot in Belfast, if at all across the water.
Yeah.
Then, of course, the Clash came.
Yeah.
This is how, indeed, I think I remember you once telling me you found out about the people who became your management team when the Clash first came over to Belfast, because they reviewed them. And I think probably nobody else had done at the time for the local...
Well, no, what it was they previewed it. They basically said that, this was going to be an important event and anybody with any interest in music should get themselves along there. And that was mainly Gordon's influence on Colin. Colin was the columnist in the paper.
Right.
And Gordon was his friend who was working for the Daily Express. He was their political correspondent, basically, I suppose, in Northern Ireland, or the guy that was there covering the situation,
Yeah.
And so that kind of made me think, oh, right, well, if nothing else, it's worth writing to these guys to get a bit of free publicity. And that first Clash gig was actually cancelled. They couldn't get insurance for the show.
Right.
And a typical Belfast reaction, we rioted outside the hall. And that was actually my first ever radio interview. I remember being interviewed by somebody from Radio Ulster going, so what do you think of this? I'm going, it's a fucking disgrace. Like, that fucking policeman, what's he hitting him for? He's done fuck all, And we went round and shouted and screamed outside the Europa Hotel to see the band. And they came out and they were trying to pacify. Well, actually, Joe and Paul came out, neither Mick nor Topper came out, but Joe and Paul came out, tried to pacify everybody, and just got basically dogs abuse from the crowd for not playing. I mean, I know, now that the shoe's on the other foot, I know how they must have felt, but at the time I just wanted to see the Clash. So
could you tell us how the situation came about where Gordon put some money in, and indeed you guys did your own first self-financed single?
The Suspect Device record, again, yeah, Gordon and Colin came to see us. We used to have to self-promote ourselves. We had to sort of book places, because nobody would book us, because obviously we were coming just on the back of the whole Daily Mirror Sun outrage against punk rockers,
The Bill Grundy thing. Yeah.
All that, exactly that time. And so, of course, they just didn't want to know. We couldn't get booked in the pubs and clubs. And it was also, you also came up against the old sort of, oh, you're not proper musicians. And I'm starting going, but you fucking booked us a month ago when we were Highway Star. Going, oh, fuck off, we're not interested now. So anyway, we couldn't get arrested. And so what we had to do, along with every other band in our own situation at the time, we had to hire halls and promote it ourselves. And one of the more popular ones was it was a stable block outside a hotel called the Glenmackin Hotel, and we invited Gordon and Colin along to see us. To be honest, I was only looking for free publicity. I hadn't got an eye on management at all.
Right.
And Gordon in particular was very interested in sort of, they mentioned straight away, have you got a manager? And I was like, no. And they said, well, would you mind if we talked to you? I said, no, not at all. And we met up the following week and went for a beer. And basically they didn't talk about management at all. They were more interested in talking about songwriting and what spurred us on. And Gordon asked, had I written anything pertinent to where I'd grown up? And of course this was just on the back, as I said, of my Hearing the Clash album, and I'd written the song State of Emergency, which is on the Inflammable Material album. And I said, well, yes, I have actually. I've written this. And he literally reached into his inside pocket and said, what do you make of this? And handed me literally the finished lyric of Suspect Device.
Right.
And I sort of read it and I thought, I can't believe this is somebody who's actually thinking along exactly the same lines that I am.
Yeah.
Went home, wrote the song, and also in sort of the same initial outpouring, wrote Wasted Life, I think probably in the same evening.
Yeah.
Met them the following week, played both to them, and instantly they put up, I think it was about 500 quid it cost to make this thing. We booked a local jingle studio in Downtown Radio, which is basically a local radio station in Northern Ireland.
Right.
And we were in there for 2 days, I say. We were in for one afternoon when we did the backing tracks. The only reason we didn't do the singing was because I hadn't got any voice at that point. So we went back on the Tuesday night and did the voice when we thought it had returned enough to do it.
Right, yeah. So you find yourself with a single, and then you find yourself in the extremely lucky position where John Peel gets hold of a copy and quite literally won't stop playing it.
Exactly that, yeah.
That scenario.
Well, it was lucky up to a point, because we were pressing the thing ourselves. We only had 500 of them. We were actually having to make the sleeves.
Right.
So, I mean, we were sitting sort of cutting these bloody things out from photocopies, gluing them together. It was like a small conveyor belt around a kitchen table.
The Blue Peter scenario.
It was exactly that. And we had the radio on in the corner, and it was like, we're listening to John Peel, and we're sort of passing these things around, blah, 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 blah. And there would invariably come a point in the show where he would go, disco, and I know I've played this a lot, but here are Stiff Little Fingers, and we're like, oh, don't play the fucking thing again. I don't want to keep doing this, you know. Yeah. We just couldn't keep up with the money. And actually, the first thing we did when we made any money at all on the record was got sleeves printed commercially. It was like, I'm just not doing that anymore.
Yeah. From that, of course, the whole Ireland thing comes along, and there was an offer made on you as a band.
Yeah.
When those who had jobs quit the jobs.
That's right.
To go to find out what they were going to do for you. Could you tell us what did happen when you actually arrived in London?
Well, actually, to be fair, we didn't get as far as London. We were flown across. I was still working at the time, and I think Henry didn't have a job. Brian probably had a job. Yeah, Ali was still trying to convince people that he was a student, but. But certainly Brian and myself did have jobs. And, they flew us across to London for a weekend to do demos at their studios in Hammersmith. And everything was great. The two guys that had flown to Ireland to see us were convinced by the band. They were right up for it. To do demos, they even put us in with Ed Hollis, who at the time had just come off the back of the Do Anything You Want to Do hit for Eddie. He was Eddie of Eddie and the Hot Rods, obviously.
Right.
To do that for a demo convinces that these guys are serious,
yes.
you know. And they put us up in quite a swanky hotel, and I don't think that our heads were turned in any way, but it was like sort of, blimey, is this actually is this what's going to happen for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
You know? We had gotten down to actually agreeing the deal. I think I can even remember now. It was like a £35,000 advance, which isn't a huge amount these days, but then was it was certainly more than I was earning in a year.
Yeah.
And it was certainly more than enough to live on, you know. So that was great, and it was all we were actually told, right, quit your jobs, boys, and come to London. Before it got that far, the demos, I believe, got to Chris Blackwell, who was head of Ireland at the time, and I think the basic objection was they didn't know how on earth they were going to market this in America. Which, to be fair, at the time was kind of what most record companies were probably thinking about punk bands, you know. Because even the Ramones, who were an American act, had only really found success over here at that point.
Right.
So I would have thought they could have shown a bit of backbone, but obviously they decided against it. And by that stage, sadly, we had quit our jobs.
Right.
At that point in time, Northern Ireland was in an area of the UK that had like a sort of 33-34% rate of unemployment, so it wasn't actually a laughing matter to quit your job.
Sure.
And we were actually on the verge of sort of chucking the towel in.
Yeah.
But through both sort of cajoling from both managers, Gordon in particular, who like sort of was, well, of course you're not going to chuck the towel. What on earth? Why are you thinking of that, for God's sake? You know. And Colin, who I seem to recall, but actually had moved to Dublin and came back up to Belfast to see us and brought like a case of lager and a bottle of vodka. And put it down in front of us and went, well, you lot can do fuck all right, can you? And just got us drunk and hoped we'd forget about it. They both still believed in us, and that made us feel a lot better. And obviously, the likes of John Peel still believed in us. So, with that kind of endorsement, we sort of set about, well, okay, how do we rebuild this? And we were lucky enough then. Two things happened. One, Gordon happened to be in the Rough Trade shop on Kensington Park Road. They were just one of the shops we sold the initial Suspect device to, and happened to mention this, and they were like, "Oh right, well, we've got, we put out the odd record. We might be interested in sort of like helping you out with a second single. We haven't got a lot of money, but we could possibly do that." So that was very encouraging. And the other thing that came almost immediately was an offer from Tom Robinson to support the TRB on their tour. And at this point, they were just coming off the back of 2468 Motorway, and the Power in the Darkness album had just come out. So they were like probably at their biggest, and at the time probably one of the hottest bands in the country.
Yeah.
So and also to completely go against the trend of support bands and main bands, not only did they not want any money from us as a buy-on, they were willing to pay us to do it, which was astonishingly generous. And so both those things coming about were incredible. I also believe that I think Rough Trade said that they would put the record out, but they couldn't afford to record it. Yeah. And Gordon, who had moved to London at that point, said, "Well, that's okay. I think I can probably get the tapes." And went round to Island Studios Maybe I shouldn't tell you this. He went round to Island Studios and I believe said, "Oh, I'm from Stiff Fingers. I'll come round to pick up the 24 track masters. We did some stuff here the other week." And we went, "Oh, right, okay, fine." They went down and they basically just gave him the boxes of tapes and he fucked off with them, and we basically remixed them and put them out on Rough Trade.
Brilliant.
As far as I know.
So allegedly. So you've got your first album, which is RT001, probably one of the first great independent albums, because it's certainly the first Rough Trade album.
Yeah.
I can't take that away from you.
Yeah.
And you went away and got it released. How did you feel at that particular point in time? Did you feel as though now things were finally, we have a plan?
It was strange, actually. It was strange because when we did the Rough Trade single, we did the Alternative Ulster single with Rough Trade. And, I mean, that was great. They were incredibly nice people, really, really nice people to work with. But to be honest with you, I think because we'd been sort of courted and jilted by a major label, I still felt that we should have been on a major label.
Yes. Yeah.
And it all still felt like an extension of the kitchen table conveyor belt syndrome to me, albeit on a slightly higher level. So when we went on the Tom Robinson tour, I was fully expecting that, we would get major label interest.
Yes. Yeah.
And we didn't. Nobody wanted to touch us. We couldn't get arrested. So I remember talking to Jeff Travis and Gordon. The talk had started to surface during the tour. Well, look, if nobody else is interested, let's just do it. Why don't you do the album with us?
Yeah.
And at that point, they'd only ever done singles, as you said, so we were the first album. And it was all kind of a leap in the dark. Nobody really knew what we were doing, and I don't think they really knew what they were doing either, with regards to actually making an album. So I think we just all looked at it as an extended single session, really, which was probably all to the good, because I think that the spontaneity is what makes the record,
Yeah.
And I think it would have been a totally different album had we managed to get ourselves a major record deal. I don't think it would have been as angry a record. I don't think it would have been as important. Certainly, it wouldn't have been as important a record as it turned out to be, because obviously when it was released and got into the top 20, that made it the first completely independent album to make the official top 20. Well, I mean, had we been with Warner Brothers or whatever, then it just would have been another album.
Yeah, sure.
So we did establish some form of landmark there, and I think also it taught us a big lesson with regards to actual sort of artistic control, as opposed to going for working with major labels or whatever. Certainly when we did come to sign with a major label, we were offered sort of huge advances, because obviously by that stage we'd had a top 20 album, so people were just sort of offering us loads and loads of money, and we realised that no, there's actually more value in people understanding what you want to do and respecting that, which came from working with Rough Trade.
Right, great stuff. Well, thanks very much, Jake.
No problem.